expense part of the budget very difficult. And in fact, as you saw earlier, about 3/4 of that 19% up there are fixed costs that you can't do a whole lot about. So let's start to look at a timeline. If you start at the bottom, you'll see what the FY10 budget allocation was from town meeting. The $22,802,000 allocation represented a 1.9% increase over the previous year, being FY09. The present year, FY11, our budget's $23,143,000. That represents a 1.5% increase over the FY10 year. And then you move into FY12 and you say, wow, the proposed modified level services budget represents almost a $1.2 million increase over this present year, or 5%. So that's a startling number. Let's try to understand why. And I think many of you know that in the years FY10 and FY11, we had large infusions of federal ARRA money. That money was delivered to North Reading and many other school districts to replace the state and local sources that had dried up during that FY10 and FY11 year. And although FY12 does have some carried over ARRA funds that we didn't spend this year, about $300,000 worth, by the way, it still means that the incremental increase from FY11 to 12 is that large. That's a startling number, but that's where we stand at this point. As we drill down deep into the budget, you'll see where that $1.2 million came from. But I think that this is probably worth pausing and reflecting on for a minute, because the ARRA money, there was a desire that those funds would be delivered to school departments so that it would hold them over until the state resources started to increase and the local resources began to increase. But they have not bounced back as quickly as we had hoped. So, and I don't think anyone's imagining any additional federal money coming our way for FY12. So therein lies the primary challenge of this budget year. So let's try to, we're getting increasingly detailed here. You may remember that number in the lower right-hand corner that I was just referencing, that $1,192,000. What caused, what is that comprised of? And when you look at the detail shown in the bottom row, you can see that $1,160,000 of it is personnel driven. Once again, no new positions, but it's still personnel driven. Only $31,000 of that increase is explained by expenses, and that pie graph illustrates that.
Carl, if I just maybe are you going to get any details on the teachers and how that works? Is that the teachers next year, if they're in the last year of their contract, have a 1.75% cost of living increase. If that was their only increase, this number would be a lot smaller.
But Carl, doesn't that also reflect the lack of the ARRA money as well? In other words, the
Yes.
salaries aren't
Right,
going up
but
$1 million.
Yes.
The fact is that we're funding it from
Right.
appropriation rather than the federal funds.
Exactly, that's what I was
Thank
going
you.
to get at. So it's the lack of the federal funds plus the 1.75% plus their normal step movement.
Yes.
So those three factors are why that number looks a lot larger this year, because we don't have we have some federal funds, but it's a lot less than we've had the past 2 years.
Thank you for bringing it up. That's very important to mention. And if you don't mind, I'll repeat the three driving forces so that everyone really understands it. There are really three driving forces that are causing this $1.1 million increase in personnel. And in descending order, it would be first, the dearth of federal ARRA funds that have been offsetting or assuaging the budget, if you will, those last 2 years. Second place explainer would be really the step increases that exist within primarily the teacher's contract. And thirdly, you have the 1.75% increase across the board for teachers. I might also add that if there was a fourth component in there, albeit fairly small, there is a salary pool created in this budget, which is found in the budget as a repository for intended collective bargaining increases that we will probably be negotiating for all of the employee groups, with the exception of teachers, in the months to come. So the salary pool is, I'll show you in the detailed section, but those are the four components, yes.
How much of the ARA money is missing?
You know,
How
it-
come there isn't like a little asterisk on each of these slides that show that amount?
Well, thank you. Perhaps I should have done that. It's about $700,000
So,
less this year. And that $700,000 had saved us in FY '10 and '11, allowed us to deliver budgets that were under 2%. You've probably heard us say many times that even a level services budget is in that 5% range every year because of existing agreements.
And Carl, I also do want to point out, if you remember, our teachers 2 years ago took 0 and also took a pay cut by taking only half of their step, which is built into their contract.
Yes.
And then this year, they're getting a 1% raise, cost of living, and they've returned to their regular step.
That's correct. Thank
So
you.
the teachers also, and our other employee groups, but especially the teachers, because they're our biggest, they played actually a big role in helping us with those smaller increases the last 2 years also. And even the cost of living of 1.75%, I'd hardly call that exorbitant.
So you've heard us use the term available funds. What are available funds? Available funds is the amount of dollars that are available to the school department to carry out its mission. And it really is, there are 4 sources of available funds. And to begin with, the state provides Chapter 70 funds each and every year to the school department. The state also provides local aid to the town. So that source is lower than usual, given the economic downturn that the state has been experiencing. Local aid on a year-to-year basis has actually been cut this year. The second source are what we call local funds. The town of North Reading generates revenues, through property taxes, through auto excise taxes, through dog licenses, things of that nature. And a portion of those funds become part of the revenue pie that we use to deliver our operations. And as you can imagine, even those funds are down this year. We carefully track, we work very closely with the town, the finance people, and we look on a monthly basis at what the town's revenues are in hopes that they will increase sufficiently for us to increase our budget. So there's a lot of attention paid to that. Thirdly, there are user fees and grants. As the public knows, the school department charges a range of user fees, ranging from bus user fees to athletic fees to extracurricular club fees. All of those fees are plugged into the budget and shown in the inside flap, as I mentioned earlier. And then, of course, I mentioned ARA as a subset of grants there because we are carrying over some funds this year. And then the last item there is called carryovers. School committee has supported a philosophy that we've been implementing the last several years to attempt to set aside as many funds as we can to handle the FY12 funding cliff. And we've been pretty successful in doing that. I think we've shown a lot of foresight. So many years worth of carryovers and circuit breaker excess and a whole plethora of fees are going to be carried over to FY12 to mitigate to some extent the funding cliff. So as we get near the end of this brief presentation, this slide shows where we are at this point in time. The FY12 available funds figure, as made available by the town, is $23,685,000. This preliminary budget that is being distributed today is $24,336,000. So the present budget gap as of January 31st, that being the date the available funds figure was published, is about $650,000. So we're $650,000 away from level services. And I think it's fair to say, too, that here we are in February, so there are 3 more months of budget machinations and deliberations that will be taking place prior to the school committee needing to vote its number. You'll be voting your number in month of May at some point. So a lot of good things, perhaps bad things, can happen in the interim, but I think mostly good things. I mean, the town is still making decisions on employee health insurance benefits. The number that it's using at the present time is a conservative number, and if changes take place there, either due to state legislation or North Reading changes in bylaws, that will increase the available funds figure. We also know that the governor filed a bill that will greatly increase our circuit breaker, a 6-figure increase. That is not plugged in here yet. We really need to wait, I think, for the House and Senate to look at it and give us an indication for whether that is going to be real or not. So there are a lot of things that are going to happen in the next 2 to 3 months that are going to change these numbers. And I suppose it's possible that that the gap could get greater. But my judgment, I don't think that will happen, because the numbers that comprise, the background numbers that comprise these numbers on the slide are mostly conservative.
I think I would agree that we're going to either stay around this level or it's going to get smaller. And as Kyle mentioned, the health insurance for employees, that's the biggest issue. I mean, there's no other issue in this budget that can have as big an impact on us and our deficit than employee health insurance costs. And I know the town administrator is working aggressively with selectmen on that, and with the town employee groups and the insurance advisory committee. But right now that's a pretty significant deficit. I had one question in terms of FTEs and how comfortable, we are only in February, but how comfortable are you with that number of FTEs that we have in the budget next year? Because it seems like almost every year there's a need for 2 or 3 more special ed paras, or there's a need for an additional kindergarten teacher, or we see an enrollment area where we have to add a teacher at a grade. There's no way of knowing that right now, right?
Well, we do have some of that knowledge, and once Kyle was done, I was going to take you through that
Okay.
multi-year staffing vision that I had included in your
Okay.
packet to show you what some of the needs are for next year,
All right.
as well as some of the wants.
Okay, good.
So as we finish up, what's ahead of us? As alluded to in this discussion, we'll be monitoring the available funds. We're hoping that whether it be health insurance or town revenues, hopefully they'll pick up. They're using conservative numbers at this point. State Chapter 70 is probably not going to change. History would suggest it's not going to change, so we probably have that number fixed. Circuit breaker appears to look brighter in the future, so there may be some help there. Second step is we'll be needing to continue to review the budget. Where can we extract additional savings? What kinds of input the school committee can provide us to cut back? So there's a constant review of the expenses. As soon as this budget booklet gets distributed, it almost becomes old. It's almost a dated document because things change from day to day. So we understand that. We do tonight want to set a date for the public hearing, because we need to probably do that. Last year we did that at the end of April, but the committee can decide when we want to do that. We might also want to set a date for a budget workshop so we can get into the budget at a more detailed level if you think that's appropriate. I think the present calendar shows that the school committee will be voting the final budget on April. I think I said May earlier, I was mistaken. It would be the last meeting in April, unless we schedule additional meeting, which we can do. So between now and then, all of this has to take place. Town meeting will appropriate the budget on June 6th. So that is a brief overview of the preliminary budget. Kathy and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments? Jerry?
The presentation's excellent, Kyle and Kathy, both. And The information that you passed out in the booklet is extensive.